Is there anyone here who was born after the year 1996? Can you show by hand if you were born after the year 1996? Wow, so many of you, fantastic. Do you know that you are called Generation Z or the Gen Z? I want to point to you how important you are when it comes to the issue of the global challenge that we are facing, like climate change. In fact, the Gen Zs constitute 30% of the world population. And in 2020, you actually form 40% of all consumers globally. That is very significant, meaning that you are very important, you are very, very significant. And what you do can have a very significant impact in our globe. So when I was planning this talk, I decided to have a conversation with Adwoa. In fact, Adwoa is my niece, and she was born in the year 2002. So she's 19 years old now. I had a conversation with her because she's also part of the Gen Z group. And in our conversation, I realized a couple of things. And I want to share with you 4 of them. And I'm sharing that because that has to do with the way the Gen Zs behave and how it can affect the climate change. The first thing I realized with my conversation with Adwoa is that Adwoa is always connected to the internet. And like some of you Gen Zs over here, the internet is your world. You use it for your school activities, for chatting with your friends, and for so many other things. But there's something Adwoa never knew. Adwoa didn't know that anytime she goes to the internet and she performs a search, she actually emits 0.2 grams of CO2 emission. Can you imagine the number of hours we spend on the internet and the number of CO2 emissions that we are adding to what is already in the atmosphere? And this is what we don't want, and this is what is causing the climate change. A Pew Research found out that the Gen Zs, you actually spend more time on the internet than any other age group. And typically, you spend 6 to 8 hours on the internet. Imagine all of you, with your huge population, decide to change your attitude towards how you use the internet, how it's going to affect the climate. And sometimes we don't need to stay on the internet all the time. In fact, the research shows that only 36% of the Gen Zs actually use the internet for the school activities. And this is what mostly you need, meaning that actually we can all cut the number of time we spend on the internet. And that means that we can actually contribute to solving the climate change problem, even from the way we use our internet. In our conversation, I also realized another thing. Like most of you Gen Zs, you are very busy, and actually everybody is busy in this world. And because of that, sometimes you can forget to put off the light when you are leaving your home. Sometimes you can forget to put off your television when you finish watching. And I commend Adwoa for that, because she actually put off all these items when she's leaving the house. But there's one thing Adwoa didn't know. She didn't know that anytime we fail to unplug these items or gadgets, they actually consume energy. Yes, they consume electricity. In fact, 10 to 15% of all the energy we consume in our homes are actually used by the things that we keep on standby. our items, our irons, our boilers in our bathroom, that we fail to unplug them. Imagine all the household in the world decides that we are going to change our attitude towards the way we use electrical gadgets. We can save 10 to 15% of our electricity bills. And that is a great asset to every family. But there's more, and I want to show you. That can actually contribute to the reduction of world electricity. Just decided to unplug your items after use can lead to that kind of a reduction of electricity. And we know that electricity alone constitutes 20% of energy we use in the whole world. Can you imagine the benefits it will make for the climate by the CO2 emission that is going to reduce? So just actually decided to inculcate a right habit in the way we use our gadget at home can actually have an impact on the climate. And this we can all do, and this is something we can all partake in. The third thing I realized in my conversation with Duah is that, like most of you Gen Zs, you like comfort. And there's nothing wrong with that, because you are born into the current generation. And I believe that what every generation should do is to ensure that what we do today can create a better future for those who come after us tomorrow. So there's nothing wrong with what you having a comfort. But the challenge is that the Gen Zs would like to stay on the air condition for too long. We like to enjoy the comfort. But you know that a typical 1.5 ton of AC actually emits 237 grams of CO2 emissions every single hour. Meaning that when you keep your air conditioning on, you are emitting CO2 emissions. Imagine we all decide that instead of keeping our AC on, we decide that we enjoy the fresh air. We decide that we go to the park and enjoy the green environment. Can we imagine the amount of CO2 emissions that we can save the world? And this is something we can do. Actually, we don't have to keep our air conditions on throughout the whole day. Sometimes what we can do is to cool our room and switch it off. And this is something that we can all do. The quest for our comfort should not be the detriment of the comfort of the masses. Therefore, we can all change our attitude towards the way we use an air condition. And that can save the climate or the world from a lot of CO2 emissions that we emit. And the fourth thing I realized with my conversation with Duah is that, like most of you Gen Zs, you pay attention to your identity. And that's why the Gen Zs are so much keen on equality, because identity is so important to you. And because of that, you want to appear very good. And those who are producing all the things we consume also understand that. So today, millions of dollars are being channeled just to get people to buy products, and they do so on the internet because they know that you, the Gen Z, spend all your time on the internet. The question we ask ourselves is that, do we always need the things that we buy? Have you ever thought that it takes 10.6 grams of CO2 to produce the shoes that we buy? And have you also thought that it takes 5.9 kilograms of CO2 to produce the clothes that we wear? You know, when I was talking to Duah, I asked her, how many shoes have you bought this year? And she told me she has bought 8 good shoes. The question is that, do we need 8 shoes? Can we imagine if we can reduce the amount of shoes that we buy, how much CO2 emissions we are going to save our planet? And actually, we don't need all these shoes. We don't need all these clothes. It reminds me of when I was in a primary school. You know, when I was going to school, I mostly had 1 shoe for the year and 1 uniform. And I'm grateful for my parents because we are a large family and they couldn't afford to give everybody so much. There were many times I felt that I needed to have a lot, like my colleagues who were always changing their shoes every single day. But I think today, when I look back, I see it in a different light. I realize that not even having more shoes, it is not so much of a bad thing. And the reason is that having a less shoes can have a less impact on the climate change. If I were a Gen Z, what will I do? I think I'll begin from myself, because for me to change the world, I have to first of all change myself. So I'll begin with what I always hold, my smartphone. Because if I can reduce the amount of time I spend on my smartphone, means that I can reduce the amount of CO2 emissions that are generated through the internet. And this thing is something I can do. So when I'm waiting for my coffee, when I'm waiting for my food, instead of being on my cell phone, I can have a conversation with the people around me. I can talk to the people around me. And that can bring a very meaningful relationship. When I'm in a bus or in the train, instead of talking to my phone, I can decide to read a book about how I can make an impact in the future. I can also begin in my home. I can turn off the things that I use that consume electricity. I can unplug all the items after I use them. And I can also begin to talk to my parents and my siblings about how my behavior and my activities at home can actually help mitigate the global climate change. And when I'm done with that, then I can extend it to outside. And most of you Gen Zs are students, so that I can talk to my colleagues. We can form a climate change mitigating club. And we can think about how, as a Gen Z, we can make an impact on the climate change. Who knows? Through this, I might end up coming out in innovation. And probably I'll be the next Elon Musk who can solve the problem of our climate in the future. Thank you very much.